Okay, yeah. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Gods Meher Baba Ki Jai. Jai Baba. God Speaks is Avatar Meher Baba's magnum opus in the literary domain. As an avataric revelation, no other account of God and creation in the mystical literature of the East or West can rival it. Undoubtedly, God Speaks will serve as the major foundation in centuries to come. Whenever man tries to bring the powers of mind and heart to an understanding of his place in the cosmos and in relation to the supreme reality. Among Meher Baba's writings, it provides the master framework in which his other metaphysical revelations to humanity will eventually need to be fitted. The 8 parts of this study program will provide a basic introduction and review of the Avatar's metaphysical masterpiece. No special knowledge or expertise is expected, although participants are encouraged to read those relevant chapters of God Speaks as preparations for the videos as listed below. And here's a brief summary of the 8 subdivisions that we're going to be covering. The first, God Speaks in its historical contexts. We'll start that today. We won't actually be talking about the main text of God Speaks itself, or in the second session either. We're going to be talking about the setting out of which it arose. And the second will be the divine theme and philosophical foundations. The divine theme is the story of the journey of the soul, which is the basic organizational idea within God Speaks, as we'll be seeing. If you understand the divine theme, you understand a lot about God Speaks. The next one will be creation and the evolution of consciousness. This will be parts 2 and 3 of God Speaks. Reincarnation and the structure of bondage. This is part 4 of God Speaks. Part 4 means chapter 4. They're called parts in God Speaks. The 5th of our major divisions will be the involution of consciousness. That will be God Speaks chapters 5, 6, and 7. Then the part 8 will be the second pass and cosmic architecture in God Speaks. The second pass means, as I'll be explaining in a later section, the second pass through the divine theme. And that chapter, the 8th chapter of God Speaks, is very long. It's almost half the book. So we'll probably spend several sessions on that. The part 7 will be the 10 states of God, the penultimate chapter, and in my opinion, I would consider it the most important single statement of Meher Baba's philosophy, or Darshna, which is the word I will be using. And then the concluding session, what's love got to do with it? Meher Baba's retraction in part 10 and the absence of the love theme in God Speaks. The topic of love hardly ever comes up in God Speaks, which is a puzzle and a question. I think most people feel, and I certainly feel, that God Speaks is Meher Baba's most important book. It's the Mount Everest of spiritual literature. Of course, there have been many great masters and teachers and revealers in the past. I feel that Meher Baba as Avatar has really given major new content and major new understandings that humanity has not had before. And God Speaks is a central locus of it. It's almost impossible to put the main ideas of God Speaks in a nutshell, but to foolishly try to do that anyway, one of the central This was the main insight in what's called Advaita Vedanta. Atman is Brahman, the soul is one with God. And this is at the center of Meher Baba's Darshna also. But in addition to that, Meher Baba has given an account of how the soul comes to the knowledge of this. The journey of the soul from the very beginning to the very end, from the whim of God to the realization of God. As best I can ascertain, this has never been explained before. And Baba's account is the first time that God has ever revealed to us. You might say it's which I'll be using. The word philosophy is really wretched as a description of what Meher Baba has given. And Meher Baba himself doesn't appear to have liked the word philosophy. So I'm going to use Darshna instead, which is the standard word used in Indian civilization for a philosophical system or a vision of reality. Most of us would know the what the connotation of this that philosophy doesn't have, that I would insist on in Baba's case, is that this is not just intellectual speculation. When Meher Baba gives this to us, it is one who knows, one who has gnosis, one who has divine knowledge, revealing truth according to the understanding of the humanity of his time. It's revealed truth. That's one thing. And another aspect that I would bring out of Meher Baba's Darshana is that it's not just intellectual understanding. It's instrumental to spiritual pursuit. It's part of a spiritual path. The purpose, as Baba says in the last chapter, is not to understand God. It is to become one with God and to unite with God with love. Well, some of the topics that you really won't find in God Speaks. One of those is discussions of the subject of love, which is rather surprising. Many of Baba's messages to his personal following all hammered home and accentuated love God, love the Master. And a lot of the other themes that you'll find, like obedience to the Master-disciple relationship, surrender, all those sorts of things. Those topics you won't find in God Speaks. You will certainly find them in other books. Many messages, discourses, the everything and the nothing, so forth. You'll find these topics talked about there, but you won't find them talked about in God Speaks. And there are even topics of a, you might say, philosophical sort that don't get broached in God Speaks. For example, you really won't hear anything about Maya, the subject of Maya. You may know the word Maya as the principle of ignorance. There's no talk about karma. Baba does talk a lot about sanskaras in God Speaks, but he doesn't use the word karma in the 10 chapters of it. Discourses, you have 7 whole essays on reincarnation and karma, but you won't find it there. So God Speaks is not the manual covering every topic that was of importance to Meher Baba's Darshana. What it does provide is a framework for the understanding into which everything can be fitted. It does fill that role. It expresses here would be an analogy for it. Let's suppose the purpose is to climb a very high mountain, okay? Well, God Speaks would be the book that tells you all about the mountain, how high it is, what it's made of, what its sheer faces are. On the east, there are jungles. On the west, there are deserts. It gives you the entire landscape and topography of the mountain. What it does not tell you is how to do it. Like, take this trail this way and be sure to bring your cleats and, all that sort of thing about how to actually make the journey. That kind of thing you can find in other books, like God Speaks. But you won't find it in God Speaks. But for what it is, God Speaks is a masterpiece, giving an account such as humanity has never had before of these topics, in my opinion. So now, in this first session, this has been in the way of general introduction to the entire enterprise, but in this first session, I'm going to be talking about the history of Baba's discoursing, out of which God Speaks arose. God Speaks was originally published in 1955. It was dictated by Baba between 1953 and 1954, dictated to Erich Jesawala, one of his close mandali. But Baba had actually intended to give out this content earlier to another of his disciples, Abdul Ghani. So I'll be going into that. But first, let's go back to the very beginning and just take a look at the history of Baba's discoursing in brief. This is a topic which has been of great interest to me. Do you have the slide? Did it come up? I had to switch from one slideshow to another. Yeah. Baba's was realized, got realization from Hazrat Babajan in 1913. And let me say, Meher Baba was the avatar. He was not a literary author. So he didn't really exert himself to write books about or explanations about things all the time. He did it when it served the purposes of his work. So for the first 8 or 9 years or so, we don't have much in the way of discourses or writing from him. The main thing we have are poems. He wrote ghazals and artis in Urdu and Persian and Gujarati. And there is an edition of those under preparation, as a matter of fact. I would myself say that Meher Baba's avataric mission began in January 1922, which was the time that Baba visited Sakori, the ashram of Upasani Maharaj, with a bunch of his followers, and there was a significant meeting between them, and Maharaj told Baba's close ones, Meher Baba is the avatar, he's Adi Shakti, and Baba left and more or less didn't come back. From that time on, Baba was really working with his own people, doing his own avataric work. For the next 3 years, we have very little in the way of discourses from Baba. He appears to have been working closely with his mandali and would explain things to them, but we don't have anything in the nature of developed explanations. But that all changed when Baba moved here, Mehrabad, in January of 1925. And in July 10th, of course, as many of you would know, he began his silence. And right after that, he started discoursing like a house on fire. As soon as it became very, very difficult for him to give discourses, he started to give lots of them. And we have a lot of content from that. And recently it has started to get published. So I have a list of some of it on this particular slide. The most important body of material from him, apparently and doubtless, is the book, is called. This Baba started writing on 13th July 1925 with his own hand, and he continued writing it for about a year and a half here at Mehrabad. He would go into the table cabin, which is still there at Lower Mehrabad, this little small structure, and would handwrite. And he did it in some other places too, a few places around Mehrabad. And the whereabouts of the book is one of the great mysteries. Nobody knows where it is, so I won't be talking about that here. But during the period that he was writing the book, Baba started to give a lot of other significant content. And a major book of that was published in 2005. It's here on this slide, Infinite Intelligence. And now, of all the content we have from Baba, in many ways, Infinite Intelligence is the other book most like God Speaks, because it's a developed, continuous series of talks expanding on a single theme. It's a bunch of 100 pages, so it's reminiscent of God Speaks in many ways. I would also make this point about God Speaks, which I'll be talking about in a later session. The most important narrative idea in God Speaks is the divine theme. As best I can ascertain, Meher Baba was the first person ever to explain this to humanity. And the first body of content in which we find it is, in fact, Infinite Intelligence. It's a book of major importance and would be worth having its own series on, which perhaps we'll get to at some time. During the same period, by the way, right here in this slide, these are the original notebooks. You see those little red books there? And there's a red book in the middle. Is my laser successfully pointing? Okay. Those are, we call them the intelligence notebooks, the manuscripts in which Infinite Intelligence was found and edited. It was rediscovered in, we started working on it late 1990s. The book on the right is another collection of discourses that Baba gave to his mandali called the Tiffin Lectures. And here it is. It was published in 2017 and is now available for your reading delight and pleasure. I would say this: God Speaks is often found to be a very difficult book. And Infinite Intelligence is often found to be an even difficulter book. But that's not the case of Tiffin Lectures. They're quite accessible and quite readable. They are Baba's talks to his intimate mandali. You might say it's the spiritual training, the education of the mandali. So it's a real opportunity that we all have. So this was given at the same time that Baba was dictating Infinite Intelligence and the same time that he was writing the book. So a lot of content was being given right here at Mehrabad then. And the third major body of material, apart from the book, as I say, which is missing, is this manuscript, which you can see on this slide. The manuscript entitles it Shri's Explanations on Creation and the Universe. And this is going to be published, we hope, within the next year under the title Creation and Its Causes. A title that Ramju Abdullah gave to it. And this too has a lot of relation to the divine theme, as a matter of fact. These were talks that Baba gave to his to the boys of the Meher Ashram. This was the school Baba had founded in May of 1927. And at night at 7:30, January, December, when it was pitch black up on the hill, back in those days there were no street lights and there was no internet, and no from loudspeakers in Erangel. It was completely silent. So Baba would give these explanations to these boys, and they're really amazing. Some of you in this room have read some of them, and I think you might share this view. So hopefully this will be coming out very soon. So this is kind of a major early Mehrabad trilogy where Baba really started to give out explanations. They're only becoming available now. When I came to Baba, none of this was known. It's the first dispensation of the avatar, I would characterize it as, and it's not like anything else I've seen. It's not like traditional Hindu discourse, I wouldn't say. It's nothing like Upasani Maharaj's discourses. It's not like Sufi discourse. It's kind of Baba's own blend. That would be a good topic to take up. But you can see what this manuscript looks like. Here's another page of the manuscript from which creation and its causes has been derived. Okay, jumping ahead. The early Mehrabad period ran from 1925 to 1929, and at the end of that period, there were other books by his Mandali, but in 1929, a magazine started to get published dedicated to Meher Baba, and you can see in this slide an issue, the June 1929 issue of it. It's called The Meher Message, edited by one of his disciples by the name of K.J. Dastur. And there's a significant amount of content from Baba in it. So we have some major bodies of discourse here. This slide, down at the bottom, you can see a list, Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, of some of the major series of content. The most important would be 3, 4, 5. God, Creator, and Creation. It's a series of 9 articles, continuous series, about 60 pages maybe. Spirit on God realization, the practical side of self-realization, and then next on inner life, the mystical side of self-realization. So these are sustained treatments coming from Baba, published in this magazine. So that's an important, we're working on an edition of this now also. In 1931, here's another Meher message, the April 1929 issue. In April, August-September of 1931, Baba's work underwent a massive change, and with it, his discoursing changed too. He paid his first visit to the West. You can see here the cover, early messages to the West, that collects a lot of this early content that Baba gave. And Baba didn't give a lot of discourses to the Westerners at this time. In 1932, he had a very, very public tour where he met a lot of the celebrities of the West. And he did give out 6 messages, but they're all short. And they're really masterpieces. But Baba's whole style of explaining things completely changed. It changed permanently. And he never went back to the kind of discourses he had given before. His language was now more global, more universal. He would use some Indian spiritual vocabulary like karma and sanskaras and reincarnation. Yeah, there'd be a little bit of it. But by and large, it's very friendly to a whole international audience. And I would say that Baba's discoursing kept that characteristic from then on. It's really for the whole world, whereas the earlier material would have been much friendlier to Indians. Non-Indians would have had a real tough time with it, which is probably why it stayed hidden until recently. So this book, I won't go over the contents of it, but it has a lot of this early material that Baba gave in those early years during his tours to the West. His Indian disciples did go on working with the content he had given earlier. This particular book, Sri Meher Baba, His Philosophy and Teachings, was published by his disciple Ramju Abdullah, one of his great disciples, based on stuff Baba had dictated before this time. And there was more work of that kind from his Indian disciples. Also, in 1934 and 35, Baba was working on a movie. He wanted to have a Hollywood movie made, and he dictated content to be put in it. And this was, again, to be based, this is related to God Speaks now, actually. All of this is. It was based on the divine theme. What he wanted the film to show was the story of the journey of the soul from creation all the way through God realization. And the outlines of it you'll be able to find in this book if you're interested. Here's Baba with some of these, with Tallulah Bankhead, one of the Hollywood stars. Here's one of the charts he gave at the time, illustrating the divine theme. Here are some strange creatures which Baba said used to exist millions of years ago as part of the evolutionary journey. So this film was really supposed to interest and entice a world audience. It never got made at that time, but we still have the notes for it, and they're a significant body of material. In 1938, this is another major step in our trip. But his Eastern and Western disciples both began to publish a monthly magazine called the Meher Baba Journal. You can see an issue of it right there. And this was the most high-quality publication that had come out until that time. And part of the reason for its really great importance is that in every issue, Baba gave one of his own discourses. I dare say many of you are acquainted with, this is a recent edition of Baba's Discourses. These were originally given by Baba in the Meher Baba Journal. Most people tend to see the Baba's two most important books as God Speaks and the Discourses. So this is when they originated, and they're real masterpieces. The Discourses as a whole don't have a plan of organization among all of them. They're discourses on separate sets of topics. They're very different from God Speaks. They're written in a very much an essay style, a nice, clear essay style. And they're very much addressed to ordinary seekers of God. They're not addressed just to Baba's own lovers. In fact, Baba very seldom refers to himself in it. But they're addressed to someone who is searching for spiritual truth and for searching for God, and the kinds of knowledge that would be helpful to such a person in a journey like that. That was all originally given out between 1942 and 1938 and 1942, and the last volume of the Discourses was published in 1945. Over the years that followed, in the next year, 1943, as you can see in this little slide, Baba had published a little booklet entitled The Divine Theme. It was at this time that he started to use that word. So this is very related to God Speaks, I would say. It was based on a Sahavas program that Baba held here at Mehrabad in 1943. And he had 125 of his of his Indian men disciples come here. It was wartime. It was hard to have a program like this. And the centerpiece of it was a meditation on this chart right here. That was the focus of the whole gathering. In fact, there are two charts. Here's another of them. I've never known which one they meditated on, but I would guess it was probably this one. You can find versions of these charts in God Speaks, redrawn versions of them there. And these, again, are telling the story of the journey of the soul, the divine theme. For the rest of, in the late 1940s, okay, I'm just going to jump right over this. Baba did not give out much discourse content. He gave out some messages here and there. And in 1949, he set out on what is called the New Life. And during the New Life period, 1949 to 1952, Baba gave almost nothing in the way of spiritual discourse. And the reason for that certainly makes sense, because he had stepped down from his station as God, as the God-man, and was an ordinary man. So he wouldn't have had the spiritual knowledge to be giving a talk with. But the main line of communication came in the form of these New Life circulars. And here's an image of the second of these New Life circulars. Even though Baba was inaccessible to his Old Life followers, these circulars were sent out to the world at large, and people could follow the course of the New Life through that. Okay, in 1952, February, the New Life ended with Mananash, and now we really start to come into our period with Baba's public declaration of his avatarhood in February 1954. And at that same time, he gave out a whole series of really major messages, and his most important books, or many of them, were published during this period of a few years. First and foremost, as you can see on this slide, is God Speaks, published in its first edition in 1955. Here is a 1968 reprint of that 1955 edition. The second edition, by the way, was published in 1973, and there have been only two editions of the book. Also in 1955, the same year, a Western edition of Baba's Discourses was published, edited by Charles Purdom. It was called God to Man and Man to God. And then we have these other books, Life at Its Best, Listen Humanity, Beams from Meher Baba on the Spiritual Panorama. So we're getting quite a lot of, they're shorter and they're not of the monumental importance that God Speaks has. But there's a lot of content coming out over those years during that prime avataric period. During this period, Baba was also engaging on his world tours. He went to the West in 1952, 1956, 1958. And all these books got published in the West by Western publishers. After 1958, Baba pretty well stopped giving out major books. 1963, there was a book of his authorship called The Everything and the Nothing. There was a Western disciple, Francis Brabazon, living with Baba during these years. He was a poet and a superb writer. And he and Erich compiled these. And these are short messages. And here you will find a lot of talk on the love theme. These are little short gems from like half a page to 2.5 pages. But this was the last book that Baba gave. So really, the 1950s was the end of his discoursing. This is a broader picture of, Baba's discourse as a whole. Now, the textual history of God Speaks itself really begins in 1947. And I'm going to read a little bit from a history of God Speaks. Let me see where it is. I have the slide numbers wrong here. Yeah. Okay. This is from a little pamphlet called The Story of God Speaks, written by Ira Dietrich. By the way, God Speaks was edited by Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, who were Western followers from Sufism Reoriented, the organization Sufism Reoriented. And Sufism Reoriented remains the publisher of God Speaks. So here is what Ira Dietrich writes about it. Is that slide up? Can you see it? Let me get my laser. In May 1947, Baba began dictating to Dr. Ghani what was to become God Speaks. Just prior to this, seemingly not by coincidence, Baba had Dr. Ghani read Hafez's ghazals to him from late evening until 4 p.m. for 21 days. Dr. Ghani was one of Meher Baba's very close male disciples who was most interested in this kind of thing. He was, I guess you could say, an intellectual, a brilliant man, highly knowledgeable on the subject of Sufism. He was quite a character, too. He was extremely funny and extremely lazy, spectacularly lazy. So there are so many funny stories, and Baba loved him very much. And Baba really wanted to give God Speaks to him, it would seem. Ghani appeared to be progressing more slowly than Baba wished in turning the material Baba had dictated into a manuscript. For in February 1948, Baba dictated an agreement that he made Ghani sign before witnesses. Get that concept. He's got one of his own mandali, and he made him sign an agreement promising to finish the book by the end of May 1948. Even this wasn't sufficient to goad Ghani out of his lazy ways, because by November 1948, Ghani had still not finished the book. Baba continued dictating additional points. And here's a story I remember Erich telling about this period where Baba was, Ghani, when are you going to finish? Why aren't you done? Why don't you get get on with the work? And Ghani would say, Baba, I'm so busy. There's this comes up and that comes up. And so Baba said, well, what do you want? And Ghani said, well, I want a valet. You know what a valet is? Like a personal manservant to help. Here he is living in the ashram. He's barely got a room. He's barely got any clothes, but he wants a valet. And all the other mandali are working like dogs. Well, Baba gave it to him. This was the game between them. I mean, these are a great disciple. So Erich said Baba sent him to get Ghani one time. This is just showing what Ghani was like. And it was the middle of the day. And Ghani would always dress very nicely in a coat and tie. So there he was, lying in his bed, sound asleep, snoring. And the valet was sitting there on a chair, obviously under orders, with a toothbrush in his hand and a little bit of toothpaste on the toothbrush. And Erich said, I couldn't believe he was so lazy. He couldn't even put his own toothpaste on his own toothbrush. But all this was just on the surface. He was an absolute gem. But he didn't finish. And so during this same period, as this slide goes on to show, Ivy Deuce visited Baba, and Baba put Ghani into contact with her. Dr. Ghani, and I'm down at the bottom here, Dr. Ghani was the writer of the original manuscript, portions of which would be included by Murshid Adus in the supplement to God Speaks. Murshid Adus would be an editor and publisher of God Speaks as it was rewritten by Meher Baba. Okay, the New Life intervened. All this came to an end. Baba was no longer God. He had stepped down and couldn't possibly dictate God Speaks since he had no spiritual knowledge. Okay, the New Life ended in 1952, and in 1951, Ghani died. And Baba said this was a great blow to his work, actually. He said it was torn away from him. And so in 1952 at Myrtle Beach, during his interview with Murshid Ivy Deuce and Francis Brabazon, this is still from this little booklet by Ira Dietrich I was speaking of, Baba asked Murshida, "Did you see my chart, the 10 States of God?" I dictated all the points to Dr. Ghani. He worked on it, and now I find that half of it has not been included. Half has been just as I wanted. I have brought the manuscript here, and when I am free, I will go through the whole thing and make necessary changes. This book will be the first and last of its kind. I think that's definitely true of God Speaks. Today, I will show you just the chart on art on which the book, is based. And when it is ready, I might hand it over to you to publish. So it appears that the 10 States of God chart was where Baba began God Speaks. It doesn't come up till the end of the book. It's the 9th chapter out of 10. But apparently that was Baba's starting spot. Okay, this is more on Dr. Ghani and how useful Ghani had the trait that he was very witty and very shameless. He would say the most outrageous things and would be so funny that he would often get away with it. So he would be with Baba and he would say some outrageous thing about God, let's say. And the purpose was to get Baba to talk about that subject. And of course Baba knew what he was doing. It was sort of a game. So Ghani was really the one who precipitated a lot of Baba's explanations on many subjects. When he died, there was no one else like him. He was quite a unique personality. So in August 1943, oh yeah, let me show you a little bit of his, we have found, where did I put it? Put it here somewhere. Okay, I won't take the time, but we have found Ghani's manuscript, as a matter of fact. It was found here a few years ago, and I'm sure the Sufis have their own version of it. So this was his original writing, and it's 14 chapters. It's 250, 300 pages. It's never been published. And I would say it is decidedly not God Speaks. It's not God Speaks. He wrote up a lot of content that he had from earlier years. It does have one chapter from God Speaks, the 10 States of God. That chapter, the original draft, was written by him. And apparently Erich obviously had it and cut out a lot and added some new content and revised it. But the original dictation was indeed from, the original writing was Dr. Ghani's work. But in August 1953, in Dehradun, Baba began dictating God Speaks to Erich Jeswala. I'm going to get the laser here. Here I am. Erich jotted down the points and wrote them out at night. The next day, he read to Baba what he had written. Baba continued dictating points to Erich. You know Erich Jeswala, one of Baba's close mandali. So Baba would dictate to him. As a matter of fact, we found that the first chapter, Baba dictated to Erich, and it got written down by Pendu. We found it. It's in Gujarati, of all things. So it appears Baba began dictating in Gujarati. But Bao said that didn't last very long, and after a while, Erich started taking down notes. Pendu, another of the great Mandali, hated things like God Speaks. He had no interest at all. So it was probably torture for him. So Baba let him off the hook. So after that, it was Erich. And I remember Erich talking about how he would do this. He would take notes in the day, and at night in Mahabaleshwar, you know Mahabaleshwar, it's up in the mountains. Erich would be in the room with the men Mandali, and they would be talking and hanging out, behaving like ordinary, normal men would do. And it was very disruptive to Erich. So he would take a blanket and put it over his head and pull in a lantern. How he kept from suffocating himself, I can't imagine. And would sit there and write out all the notes that Baba had dictated to him during the day. And apparently, the next day, Baba would know exactly where he was and start up from exactly that point. So what we have is dictation from Baba to Erich Jesawala from August 1953 until June, July 1954. And I pointed this out before, but let me do so again. August 53, he began dictating it. In September 1953, Baba gave his message, The Highest of the High, which does not quite say that he's the avatar, but it sure hints at it. It's the first near declaration, public declaration of his avatarhood. Baba went on major tours of Andhra and Hamirpur later that year, and in February in Hamirpur, Baba declared his avatarhood. So this was dictated during this very period that Baba was publicly coming out as the avatar. People had known it before, and Baba had given hints before, but this was the first time that Baba publicly declared himself as such, right when God speaks. So I consider God Speaks to be the avataric period. And look at the title, Baba, the silent one, right? Who's kept silent for 30 years. God Speaks. This is God speaking. It's a very daring title, but it's true. It's the avatar speaking to humanity. A master title.
Now can we take question answers?
Okay, let me take 2 more minutes and finish up, and then I'll be at the end. In 1954, he gave the manuscript to Lud Dimphal, and then in 1955, the book was published, and this is the last point I'll make, that Baba, there was a Sahavas here at Mehrabad. Actually, our neighbor, Sam Shaker, his father was one of the participants in it. And where Baba had intimate Sahavas with male followers from India in 4 different language groups, 1 week each. The point of the Sahavas was that it was to be intimate exchange of love between lover and beloved. It was exactly that same month that God Speaks was released. So I'm struck by this coincidence. God Speaks, which is the most highly philosophical, impersonal, abstruse expression Baba gave, was released at the very same moment that he was having Sahavas with his intimate lovers with a given exchange of love. That the 2 aspects coincide in that moment. And that gets us to the publication of God Speaks. And next week I'll say more about the later editions and other matters pertaining to the book in general. Okay, do we have any questions, Naman, or anybody? We've been forging ahead here despite beeping and no electricity. That's just like Baba to do this at the very start. Or do any of you have any questions?
So, Shivesh Soni has a question. He says, is the book How It All Happened about the film available anywhere?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a section of the book entitled Early Messages to the West. It's that book has various content. Here's what that book looks like. If we can get it up on the screen. That book has various content. Baba gave 1932 to 1935. And How It All Happened is all there. What we have, I mean, it's scattered fragments and little bits of dictation, but it's most interesting, I would say. Mm-hmm. And it's on the subject of the divine theme. That's what Baba wanted to have his film on. Yeah.
We don't have any more questions.
Any of you have anything? So God Speaks was really the culmination, I would say, of Baba's discoursing until that point. The culmination in the sense that he was giving an understanding of the high philosophy, of the highest aspect of truth. And with it, you can come to an understanding. I mean, everything else can be fitted into that, I would say. And after dictating God Speaks, Baba never gave anything like that again. That was the end. That was the first and the last. So how long have we been running? Is it time to...
1 hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, too long. Oh, I went on too long.
First 15 minutes blank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's around an hour.
Yeah. I know we've been doing this in the dark where I can hardly read my notes and
Yeah.
this is Baba's sense of humor. Somebody needs to talk to Baba about his sense of humor.
You guys can convey the comments to Ward. जो भी बोल रहा है comments. You guys can read the comments.
I think he read this one already. He read it. He read it himself.
Who read it?
No,
He cannot read it.
cannot.
Yeah, please read it.
But then how Baba says,
So dark.
So Janet Isaac is saying thank you, dear Ward, and Shivis is saying thank you, and
Lauren is saying, thank you so much, Ward. Well worth waiting for. Through the lack of electricity, intermittent sound, Baba's sense of humor. And Jim says, love it time traveling with Baba.
just a human being. Tiffin Lectures is great. Some guy with the name Just a Human Being.
I would say Tiffin Lectures is a very readable book of Baba's discourses. Not hard at all.
But the most readable is Creation and Its Causes.
Yeah, this book will be coming out this year, Creation and Its Causes, and it's wild. It's some of the most esoteric stuff we've ever had, but it's very readable. It's amazing content. So this will be, I'm not expecting after Creation and Its Causes, I'm not expecting to see anything new on that order again. That may be the end of it. We'll get more things. We'll get more discourses from Baba, but I would be surprised if we get anything quite like that. So Baba had these phases where he discoursed very intensively. The 1920s, 25 to 29, he did. He gave out all this stuff in the Meher Baba Journal. And then the 1950s, he gave out a lot of content. But there are other periods where we don't have much from him in the way of discourse. Long periods, like the 1940s, very little.
Can somebody read the comment by Jim?
So Jim says a good start, like a rocket's first stage, heading for the heights.
We almost got blown up on the launching pad with this big storm coming in here.
Yeah. Can we read?
These sessions will happen every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a question by Shivesh. She's asking, these sessions will happen every week. Yes.
Yes,
It will happen every Sunday, 4 to 5 p.m.
yes, that's
Yeah.
the plan.
Yeah.
And also the
That's why.
videos should be available, that's correct?
Within 24 hours.
So within 24 hours, you can convey
Within 24 hours on YouTube at /Mehrabad.
/Mehrabad.
What's that?
YouTube.com
Nice.
/Mehrabad.
YouTube.com /
You already do it.
.Mehrabad. You'll have these videos will be
Someone
here.
said that.
So next time we'll be continuing with more on the history of it, and then other subjects like what the book's, what its parts are, what its contents is. And also next time I want to say a little bit about the style of God Speaks. God Speaks is found to be a very difficult book, and I wanted to make some comments about that and things that may be helpful for the reading of it. By the way, I think one of the best ways to read God Speaks is in a group. Many groups have done this, where we'll read the whole book, not the supplement, but the whole 10 chapters, all in a day. It takes about 9 hours.
You guys have to read comments and answer the questions. Questions are coming. Please answer the questions.
How do we ask questions? Type.
There's a question, US Indian 51. He's asking, how do we ask questions? You can type them here and we'll get back to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Jai Baba.
Okay, so there's our first session. We'll resume next Sunday, India time, 4 p.m. And hopefully we won't have the same problems with electricity that we had this time. Okay, everyone. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.